All right. I think we can get started now. All right. Thanks everyone for joining us. We've not done one of these for a little while, but we thought we'd take you through all the product updates we've been working on the last 6 or so months, and actually give you a glimpse into what we're doing in future. Before we get into that, I want to introduce you to the panel today. We have David from Overe. He's our solution architect. I think most of you guys on the call know David already. And then we've got Neil Shaw, who's actually an exited founder. He's running his own consultancy at the moment, and I'll let Neil introduce himself. But one of the things which I did want to um, hint at is that we are forming our customer advisory board, and most of you guys which we engage with regularly, you're already giving us all the great feedback on the product, and also on the go-to-market side, and that's something which we're looking to formalize over the next few weeks. So more to come on that, and if you guys are interested in helping us out more than what you're already doing at the moment, then we'll bring you into that advisory board as well. So again, I would like to formally introduce Neil. So maybe Neil, if you could give a quick overview of your background.
Sure. Hi, everyone. So I've been in the IT industry for forever and a day, over 30 years. And in 2017, I founded a business with a business partner, which went on really well up until 2025, early 25, where I decided to exit. So now I help MSPs and other tech businesses with a bit of guidance and kind of helping them not make the mistakes I may have done early doors, and sort of helping them grow and scale quicker and more efficiently, essentially.
Great. Thanks, Neil. And I think just before we get into the product updates, I did want to kind of pick your brain a bit on the whole Microsoft 365 problem or opportunity, let's say, which you're experiencing back in your prior role. And I know that we met a couple of years ago, and I know you had a very slick operation as an MSP. I think that was kind of what attracted your exit, and would really love your take on really how you see MSPs operating with Microsoft 365 today. When you guys were, I saw you guys setting the bar really around how MSPs should do it. Just walk us through what you're actually doing internally and kind of the fragmentation of tools and what you're dealing with operationally.
So very kind of you to say so. I think on the surface, yes, it does look like we and other good MSPs have everything together, but the frustrating part, I guess, is that from the outside, it's a integrated platform. 365, everything's there, everything's where you need to be. But internally, you are juggling many different solutions. You need different skill sets. You jump in between things like Defender, the compliance portal, Entra, Intune, and you're all over the place. So it's really tricky to kind of figure out what alerts make sense, what's noise, and to correlate everything, and to also give that unified view to the outside world. That you are their trusted IT partner. So really, you have to have everything together. So yeah, it's really frustrating, and it's hard work. So any kind of tool to consolidate or to make our life easier was very welcome.
Yeah. And around, I guess, from the customer side, as you're kind of engaging with customers, like that whole notion of how do you keep them confident around their security, and how does that kind of, I guess, false sense of security when you are an MSP managing multiple tenants, how does that kind of surface itself?
So again, you're there to give the client confidence that you have everything in hand, and should there be a problem, you've got it handled, and hopefully there won't be any problems. So it was a really tricky balance of finding the right tools, usually third party, because Microsoft wouldn't do it all itself, or if it did, it was really complicated to handle. So to kind of give a client the comfort they needed and the sort of security they needed, it was a concerted effort between the whole team of managing multiple solutions, and trying to just get the data where it needed to be, so that you can actually confidently give them a report that has substance and means something.
Yeah. That's super interesting. So I think on the report side, you'll be glad to know what we've been working on at OV. I'm going to let David walk us through that, but it kind of leads into also what we've been working on with the conditional access assurance. So think I was asking around that whole confidence side. I think one thing which we've seen with MSPs and even direct enterprises we've engaged with is that kind of how do you assure how do you get that confidence and the factual nature of understanding whether attackers can get in, and so we're excited to kind of walk you guys through that. But I think we can bridge into really into David's piece now. I want to kind of have him do a show and tell. I think for those which we've spoken to directly on the call, I think everything which we do at Overe kind of revolves around our 4 pillars. And just very briefly, our assess pillar. So as you guys have probably experienced, as soon as you come in the product, really very quickly able to see if there's any risks. Super excited to announce a conditional access assurance today, and I think some of you on the call have already requested reports for existing tenants, and you're all welcome to request reports. So we'll give you more information on that. So that's the assessment, and then we move into the hardening piece, which is really that policy orchestration. So making it super easy to operationalize Microsoft 365 through templates and some of the smart new things which David's going to walk us through around Intune and some of the advancements there. We're always keeping an eye on the ITDR piece, so that's like the identity threat detection piece. So we're adding rules all the time. Some good advancements on the monitoring and respond pillars as well. So making it super easy for you to, understand where the risks are and automate responses if you wish to do so. So I guess with that said, I think David, it's over to you to kind of walk us through all the good stuff.
Sure, sounds good. Yeah, so if we move to the next slide, hopefully you'll see sort of what we've been releasing. But yeah, so we're building really quickly here at Overe, as I'm sure you guys can feel and can tell. So yeah, we started the year with releasing every Wednesday. That's now every other Wednesday, which feels slightly more sort of civilized. But yeah, that's can be an expansion of existing features. It can be some internal-facing things, enriching our threat intelligence, keeping pace with new attacks we're seeing. But there's plenty of customer-facing features as well that I'll walk you through today. And yeah, I suppose everyone who is managing Microsoft at scale has their own specific set of headaches and problems and things that they wish that could be done easier, that could be done by a tool like ours. There are a different set of headaches, but there seem to be some sort of common headaches. So that's why we sort of focused our development very much around customer requests, compliance, and policy coverage. So yeah, that is sort of the highlights, but it's probably easier just to show you in the product. So just let me share my screen. Okay, do you see that all good? Perfect. Yeah, so I think the sort of cardinal sin of webinars is doing a live demo and also straight after a new release, but I'm sure it'll all go fine. So yeah, here you're looking at Overe. So let's start with the global dashboard, right? So this piece came in at the start of the year. It does 2 things, really. It pulls all the insights from across Overe all together into the one place, which you treat like a sort of home base. It displays information about all your tenants at once. So, you're an MSP, you're managing multiple regional tenants. If you're an internal IT team, this display is ideal. You can choose exactly which tenants you want to feed into the insights that you're looking at on the current page. So we begin with some high-level stats around all the tenants that are selected, and then we display the enter sign-in activity that you see. That could be a nice thing that sort of sits in the background, lets you visualize what's going on. And then the first important part is the action hub here. So yeah, the action hub, it creates these action tasks for you. So it tells you exactly where you should look in Overe, basically. What's the next thing that's in your Microsoft tenants that's worth your attention? What do you want to do? How should you tackle it? How do you use Overe to do that? So, we'll have an optimization task like this. We'll say, hey, the last time since we've looked at this tenant, you have another application that's classified as dormant. We create an action task. Should you go and review that? And then this sort of gives you a home base over, this is the next thing that I need to do, sort of Microsoft and in the tenant. And then further down, we have our site summary. So while we're here, I guess I can point out the new release that just came out today, which is these the branding resources that you can add in. So you see this nice little picture of me. There is the logo for this tenant. You can then come into org config and you can add in branding resources. So you can do icons or logos. And then also we check your tenant branding resources as well. So we pull your Microsoft tenant and say, hey, you know, these tenants have already had their logo set in Microsoft. We can import that in and you can pull it through straight to Overe. And then that's going to be used eventually in the deep scan reporting, in the deep scan and in the reports to add the logo and branding on a per tenant basis. But yeah, so we have the branding information added in, and then we have the site summary section. So at a glance, you can expand each of these sections to see information about a specific tenant, all from this one board. So you know, you hover over this tenant and you say, oh, you know, why is this red? Oh, there's a risky forwarding rule in one of the recent deep scans. You know, you come and can expand that section, and you can see information basically about all the tenants at once, and you can work through those sections. What's the information about policies in this tenant? What are the alerts that have been created in this tenant? So the idea here is this global dashboard. We bring everything in Overe together, operationalizing the entire platform, make it very easy. I'd also be remiss if I didn't point out always, because there's someone who doesn't know it's there yet. If you're on a page, you see that walkthrough button in the top right, you can click through and we'll describe everything that you're seeing on whatever page you're using. So I just have to bring that up because there's always someone who doesn't know about that. And then another release that we pushed this year is the multi-language capabilities, right? So set the entire platform into Japanese and various other languages that we're sort of adding all the time. So that's another feature that we've pushed. And then the policies section. So I'll come to policies in a tenant. We've added the multi-tenant management with policy templates. We've added these teams and SharePoint policies. And some Intune policies, right? We say, hey, we think it makes sense that you have an expiration time on the anonymous links in SharePoint. And we're now up to, over 100 policies now in total, which is a rapid expansion. We've also added some Intune policies. So yeah, we could take a look at perhaps some Intune Windows policies. So one of those. So we've mapped this policy here. This one is a Windows Defender policy. Real-time protection is enabled. Antivirus signatures up to date. And then we've gone through the various compliance frameworks, mapped them to the subcontrols. So, you know, for the cyber essentials, AV EDR is present, active, and reporting healthy. You've pushed this policy, you know you're compliant with that subcontrol. And then we have this coverage scanner, which means not only can you use Overe as the sort of basis for your Intune policies, but you can plug a tenant in, you can look at the Overe policies and check to see if you have existing policies in the tenant that you already cover. So that based on our recommendation, you don't need to start from scratch. You can use our recommendations just to supplement your existing policies and bring all your tenants in line. So that's what we've added in the policies area. And I'll move over to alerts. So you can now manage alerts in bulk in the UI by these radio buttons. You can change the status in bulk. We've added some new rules in terms of patterns of potentially malicious activity that we've added in here. So new ones. We've also improved our dynamic severity logic. We've added new threat intelligence sources. We allow customer responses based on the severity. So, you know, if there's a pattern of activity that we see, you know, for example, suspicious mailbox rights allegations, right, where someone's given the full permissions of a mailbox to another mailbox, that might not be potentially malicious if it's from someone on an office IP that you're expecting that activity. But if it's by an IP that one of our threat intelligence sources has said is potentially been seen doing malicious activity elsewhere on the internet, then obviously that's a higher severity alert. So the same pattern of activity might require a different response based on the sort of metadata about who's doing what in the tenant. And yeah, we're constantly improving our threat intelligence all the time. We've got some OEM partners now who just ingest this sort of piece of our product and put that into their platform and build their wider service around that. So yeah, we're really happy with how we're coming along in this area. We have added we've got the config, we've got custom notifications. So we've added the notification rules. You can notify based on change of the posture of a tenant. You can set up your own custom rules based on these patterns of activities. You can say, hey, every time this tenant, someone in this tenant does an anonymous delete sequence, they come into OneDrive, they delete their files, and they quickly delete them from the recycling bin. Whenever we see that pattern of activity, I want this person to get an email about it. I want this webhook to have an alert push to it. So we've added the custom notifications. Those notifications are also available in multiple languages as well. So yeah, we've added to the alerts, and then one other piece that we can add and sort of highlight is the supplements to the deep scan. So we have the deep scan, which, as you know, pulls all the information from the various parts of the tenants. So we have this information that pulls through, and we have what we call report exclusions. So, for example, you see there's this account which, maybe it's a break glass account. If it's called bad guy, it's probably not a break glass account. But the idea here is that, hey, we generate this report, and you say, hey, no, we know why that account is there and doesn't have MFA enforced. That's a break glass account. You can add that as an exclusion and say, hey, this is we're doing it live, as they say. So this is break glass. I want to add an exclusion here for this. And then I want it to be reviewed in X number of months. That's important for the sort of compliance-minded folks who will say, hey, come and review your security risks at X interval. You add an exclusion. This then you view the filtered report. That won't appear on the report anymore. Maybe that means it's more suitable to send sort of direct to a customer without you needing to caveat and say, no, we know why that's there. We give you that full flexibility around who sees what. We've added guided security operations. So for each part of the scan and areas of the product, we interpret what we see here. We convert it into this sort of plain text understanding, so you know exactly what you're looking at, what it means in plain text. But then we also pull information from the wider tenant into these summaries, give you recommendations about information that we see about the tenant. So that's just some of the features. There are more that I haven't sort of covered yet, but I think hopefully that covers what we're most of what we're seeing, and gives you a good idea of the sort of progress that we're making in Overe. So yeah, as we're working through sort of these developments, there were some sort of problems that we encountered, especially with conditional access policy controls and recommendations, that really led us to building our own tools to resolve those problems, and then realizing actually this is a real opportunity to make those tools part of the product and available to you guys. So I'll sort of pass back over to Paul to expand on what that exact problem is and how we're tackling it.
Cool, thanks, David. A lot of updates there, and I think just before I go into the CAA tool, there is that GSO button, which I think we still need that shortcut key, right, David? It's Control Alt and A to enable it.
Yeah.
So if you don't see it, Control Alt and A once you're in the portal, then you'll see it. It's a little Easter egg we had, but we will be enabling it for all. So it's really there, and there's a whole link in there about how we use AI and responsibly, and how we ensure zero hallucination. So have a read of that. But if you do want to take advantage of that GSO feature, it's going to be a core part of us. Platform strategically. I'll go into that as we kind of talk about futures and where we're heading. But as David said, I think one of the key things which we were looking at as we were looking at our own policy, how we address conditional access policies from an Overe standpoint, we started to uncover some opportunities to do something very unique. And so just before I dive straight into it, one of the, and there's a busy slide, I know, but there's one of the things which we see all the time, and this is kind of a common attack path for most big breaches or attacks hitting even your clients. So it typically starts with credential compromise. So we all kind of resign to the fact that our credentials are out there in some shape or form. Definitely your emails, your passwords. There can be these mega breaches which happen. They're probably likely out there in some shape or form. I think one thing which we see super interested in Overe, and I'm not sure how often you guys go into it, but there's an insights tab, and you can see at the brute force attempts when smart lock gets hit. So there's a kind of gives you an idea of who's hitting you. It's one of those hidden kind of drill downs which we have on a per tenant. But the key thing is that you kind of assume that if you've got security in place without MFA, you're going to be in trouble. And so one of the things which we've been looking at is we've been kind of shocked at when we've been using our new CAA service on some tenants, is that even though there's several policies in place covering MFA, there's quite often gaps. And so there's gaps caused intentionally. Maybe there's a break glass account and that's under lock and key and you need that in case of emergency, but there's unintentional gaps. And so we see this all the time, and I think it's kind of interesting when you get administrators from one SaaS platform to another. The kind of secure by design and of some platforms, whereas at Microsoft's a bit more open and you have to kind of create your own policy set. We see some of that going on. So what this is trying to illustrate is that there's certain policies which you might have in place that may open risks for you. And so in some of the scans which we've been running, so we've run scans from small tenants all the way to large tens of thousands. And one of the things which we've seen is that there's more often than not more attack paths available in the larger tenants and the smaller ones. But still in the smaller ones, there's things there to be looked at. But the way that an attacker can get in is it could be from several factors. And David's going to walk us through the tool in a moment, but it could be around the sign-in risk. Have you configured the policies as such to block all the types of sign-in risks, which you should, whether compliant devices. The one which is a bit of a rabbit hole is on the apps. So as we kind of look at conditional access policies and when you assign them to apps, it's quite often things are missed. And I think one of the things which we're seeing is new roles being provided by Microsoft, like an AI role is more of the recent ones, and new apps being added into Microsoft's environment. So the kind of attack surface is changing all the time. So as the attackers brute in your environment, they quite often find a way in. And the beauty of what we've managed to design and build, and we've been using with some of you guys, is a way to kind of interpret all the attack paths very quickly. So we give you the heads up before being able to actually the attacker being able to take advantage. So really, this is when we've been validating this with. We spoke to enterprises of over 400,000 users and Microsoft MVPs, and looking at what process they have today to actually validate whether their conditional access policies actually are effective. And most of them are a hybrid between manual tools and some single path simulation tools. And this is quite common with even the best recommendations from MVPs to kind of say, hey, this is the best practice to understand your MFA. But the problem with this is very much point in time. So once you've done it, the attack landscape for your environment changes. So you add a new app, you add a new user group or role, you add a new device, then there's the kind of possibilities are kind of exponential. And this is why we see millions of different attack paths. We monitor millions of different attack paths constantly to see if those gaps are opened. The costs of doing this, and so we've got a mix of MSP clients and enterprise clients. Enterprise clients tend to have deeper pockets to pay consultants £5,000 or £10,000 or dollars to run these assessments. But again, point in time for MSPs, I guess I'm going to turn to Neil in a moment, but this is kind of unattainable to be able to do this on every single client. If you think about MSPs running 100 clients, how are they going to be able to do this? And then I think it's, the output of it is kind of recommendations and not actually having anything tangible in place to quite often put in place, and not that the continuous assurance. So, as soon as the consultant leaves a building, how do I know that the next day this is not going to change? And so this is kind of us, like how we saw once we did the validation and comparing to what we've done. And I think, as you see on the right, I think one of the beauties of what we built is something which continuous. We do full simulation of your tenant, so there's no gaps left untested, let's say, because we have a very unique approach to being able to do this. It gets around some of the complexities of the graph APIs, and there's limits of what you can do when you're interrogating Microsoft. So we found some novel ways to not hit the ceilings there. But before we kind of go into like what the tool does, I'd love just kind of Neil's perspective on the problem. And the enormous challenge of having to do this as an MSP.
Yeah. How long have you got? I guess. So I think there wasn't necessarily an issue with the individual tools we have, at our disposal. The problem is no one really sort of owned the assurance layer, which sat above everything else. So this kind of technology is truly game changing. I mean, in the past, you could make changes across the board on multiple tools, and you assumed it was okay, and you assumed that there wasn't a gap because you toggled, a policy on or off or whatever. But generally, someone senior would have to step in and review those changes. And I think more often than not, were they really reviewed because of the granularity of everything that could possibly have a knock-on effect? It was mostly, we trust that if this is turned on, it's on, and there are no gaps anywhere else. So having something that continuously monitors not just changes we make to make sure we're making the right changes, but just to make sure gaps haven't opened up over time is truly game changing. I really believe so.
Cool. Thanks, Neil. Yeah, and so just on the product side, and this is kind of this is what we built, and there's some parts of it Dave's going to walk you through visually what we have, and I'll walk you through the kind of roadmap of how we're going to bleed it straight into the product. But it's that whole notion of that continuous gaps discovery. So we're constantly being able to scan your environment and look for deltas, differences in that, and surface that up. Again, these might be things which are intentional or unintentional. So if they're intentional, we'll give you the ability to kind of accept the risk, and we'll still monitor it, but it's something which you should be aware of. One of the byproducts of this, and it's actually one of the primary use cases we wanted for this, is this whole notion of instant policy simulation. So with Overe, we have a capability to push a whole raft of policies, but what would the impact of that policy be on an environment? So if you're to use one of our conditional access policies and blast it out there, we've had some clients which locked out phones and printers because they've turned MFA on, and who's kind of added in there. They've not added the exclusion. So what we wanted to do is really figure out, okay, if we put these policies in place, what's the impact going to be? And the only way to do this is to have full understanding of the policies, the interactions between users, devices. But we didn't want to wait for this whole notion of reporting the devices or users or applications reporting back in, similar to what Microsoft does when you stage in a conditional access policy. We wanted this instant. So this is essentially what we built. It's part of this gap discovery. We have the ability to simulate policies, and these are primarily aimed at our policies, but they also could be your existing conditional access policies. So there's a really neat capability there. So as perhaps you've got an established way of doing conditional access policies, you can leverage this service to be able to understand the impact without having to wait for those report ins from all those users, devices, applications, and see that impact instantly. And then the end one around patching. So as part of this gap discovery, of course, we're going to advise you how to close the gap, and so we'll kind of walk you through that as well. But this thing is something which we've not seen any other vendors out there doing it. Certainly the consultants and the large enterprises which we've spoken with are kind of, they can't wait to start using this. And so we're sharing this with you guys today. I think some of you have actually had reports from us. This is coming into the product. We're super excited for it. And I'm going to stop talking and let David show you. Well, you're on mute.
Of course I am. Yeah. So thanks, Paul. It's I'm excited to show off what we've built here and also where we're going. So yeah, conditional access, it's the primary identity control for Microsoft and 365. If you have enterprise applications, it then becomes the door to everything else, right? ServiceNow, Salesforce, DocuSign, whatever uses Microsoft to authenticate. Conditional access also controls access to that by proxy. So it's so important. It's the fundamental, the door to any tenant. And there's probably, a dozen questionnaires, like compliance questionnaires that you've ticked or signed off that state, hey, my tenant has appropriate access control, and MFA is enforced properly where appropriate, things like that. Sort of nebulous agreements, things that you've ticked and signed and said, yeah, this is the case. But how do you prove that, right? How do you prove it? How do you validate the configuration of your conditional access in the tenant so you know exactly who can reach what in the tenant in what circumstances? So in a tenant in Microsoft, there are dozens of these policies. They make it generally hard to reason about what the net outcome of a dozen policies is. As you can imagine, just trying to picture how two policies interact with each other at once, there are dozens and dozens. I think about them the same way as a firewall, right? It has rules about what type of traffic from where can interact with what resource under what conditions. Conditional access is exactly the same for identities reaching applications. So yeah, there's policies that will block, the finance security group accessing the invoice platform if they're not in this specific country, or the CFO is going to work internationally. You temporarily remove them from a group. Now, what does conditional access look like for that user that you've modified? We need to be able to answer these questions. So that's what this tool does, basically. It not only answers those questions, but it knows what questions to ask by calculating all the possible gaps here. So what we do is you plug a tenant in, we ingest all your conditional access policies, we understand the logic between them, and then you provide us a policy scope. So you say, look at my conditional access tenant. I want to look at all my MFA or block related policies. So I want to look every pattern of activity that is possible in my tenant, every app from every user using every type of device. What pattern of activity can they do that will not either have MFA enforced on them or they'll be blocked from doing that activity? So we feed that logic in and we say, right, simulate every possible pattern of activity that one of our identities could take in the platform. Which patterns of those activities don't get MFA enforced or don't get blocked? And we highlight those gaps, every single gap. So that gap can be for a specific group of users. It can be for a specific set of devices. It can be for a specific set of locations. So this tool, it presents those gaps in the tenant. And then for each of them, it converts them into a plain text report to help you understand them. So for this one, for example, this gap, it applies to these 14 users. We generate you this plain text report and say, hey, there's a gap for these 14 users. When they try and reach this app from this country, from this platform, using a browser, and their sign-in risk is hidden, low, or medium, they can access this resource without either having MFA enforced or being blocked from accessing this resource. So very quickly, you understand this is a gap for these users in my tenant. And then you look at the users and say, right, we know why this is a gap. This is because we're happy that that these users can reach these apps if they're on the Office IP address and they're using a compliant device, for example. So that's a gap that we present to you and we say, here's the gap in plain text. You understand the gap. You tick it off and say, yeah, I know why that gap is there. I put that gap in there specifically. I understand this scenario. And then we verify that specific gap. We're using the Microsoft What If tool just to double check our work. So we can, let's say it's me, for example, and I'm logging into Microsoft Exchange Online. I'm doing it on the iOS platform and I'm using my browser. We send over a simulation of that pattern of activity over to Microsoft and say, hey, Microsoft, if David logged into this from this country using this browser, would he hit any MFA? Would he have MFA enforced? Would he be blocked? Microsoft says no. Our simulation that we do on the logic of it says no. That is a legitimate gap that is in the tenant. So that we run this simulation, we can run it on your entire tenant. We present all the gaps to you. And I guarantee there will be a gap in there that you've created inadvertently by it's someone's added an exception to a device it's one of the techs. They were setting up a new device. They added it as an exception to an Intune policy because they didn't want to have to put MFA on the device when they were setting it up because they were about to ship it out to a user. Things like that. These exceptions happen all the time. The groups move, the groups change. It's completely dynamic. We calculate all the combinations and show you, hey, these are the gaps. But it allows us to do more than just present the gaps to you. We can recommend the policy that would plug in the gaps that we're highlighting. So we can make a policy recommendation that says, hey, this current gap occurs when they try and reach these 26 apps. What about a policy that blocks 20 of these apps because only these 5 make sense to not have an MFA requirement when they're from the office, for example. So we allow you to, we make the policy recommendation, and then the magic is that we can then simulate your entire tenant again with that hypothetical policy put in place. So we then do the calculation again. In this case, as if you're simulating another policy on top, we say, hey, now we're considering that policy as well. The new gaps that result in your tenant only apply to 12 users. They applied to 14 before, but this policy recommendation you've changed changes the aspects of all the gaps that now sit in your tenant. We flag those up and go, hey, now the new net results are these gaps. They happen to these users when they do this activity under these circumstances. And you're able to verify and check that. And that means continuously, when we detect a new gap, we can flag that up and say, hey, since the last time we ran this scan, this is a new gap. Has this been introduced unintentionally? And then we can also use it to predict the impact of policies, right? We can say, hey, we recommend this policy. It's going to plug this existing gap. It's going to narrow the scope. This will be the net outcome. Does that now make sense? Is this the gap that you want, that you intended? Is it a business rules logic? Are you accepting the risk in that and the sort of trade-off with usability and security here? And this sort of tool, like this assessment in itself, in total, is, like I say, it's something that MSPs wouldn't be able to do on their own tenants individually, and even enterprises. It's sort of done a mock-up of what one of these reports looks like, but they spreadsheet out all the possible people. They look at all the individual apps. They do this building out all of them, all the possible permutations. This tool does it for you within seconds, and then you can simulate those new policies in seconds again. So, I mean, just a few, obviously I'm excited by the technical aspect of this, but I can see so easily how it would apply to many people. So as Neil was saying, an MSP owner, they don't rely on the admin just saying, hey, this is how this will work once I make this change. You can see it in front of your eyes. A 365 administrator doesn't need to understand all these millions of possible permutations instantly. You don't need to think about what's going to happen with your new groups and exclusions and exceptions. You push the change and then you understand it instantly. You're an IT manager, right? You're managing different employees with different experiences and knowledge of 365 or existing tenants. Your 365 guy leaves or his role changes. You're expert in this area. This is a great upskilling tool that you present to someone who's less familiar with conditional access policies in that tenant specifically. They're very quickly up to speed with exactly what their net outcome is and how things work. And then, even as an MSP bringing on a new customer, right? You bring on a new tenant, someone else has set up the conditional access policies. What does it look like? How have they set them up? How is it different to your other tenants? How does that align? What changes could you make to bring them in line with the posture of your other tenants? When your customer asks a question like, hey, can I take this device abroad with me and I'll still be able to log into my email, right? You can roughly say, well, yeah, no, I guess we can look at these policies. Probably these ones will apply. But then that's a specific one scenario that you're feeding to Microsoft. We need to feed all those scenarios to Microsoft or simulate them, feed them in, and then say, these are the gaps. These are the potential routes that an attacker could get in with using just basic authentication if it's a gap in MFA policies. But you can do the same with compliance policies. You can say, hey, Overe, look at my tenant. What are the scenarios that a user can access any resources without using a domain joint device or without using a device that's compliant with all of our Intune policies? So you can understand a huge amount about what questions to ask and also the answers to those questions. And you can also do it continuously. So when we see the new gaps, when things change, we represent that to you and you acknowledge it and you understand it. So from my perspective, this tool replaces hours and hours of work. It helps you understand things that you literally wouldn't be able to understand just from the 365 view, which is just the name of a policy and a couple of conditions it applies to. This is the tool, and I'll leave Paul to talk about what we're planning to do with it and how we're going to integrate it and hopefully make your guys' lives a lot easier.
Oh, thanks, David. Yeah, you can tell we're super excited about this. I think one thing just to stress is that the UI, one of the things which we're working on is actually making the UI super usable. So that's why David's got flashed up a report. We've been working with some of you on these types of reports because we don't want to overwhelm you with all the data. But just before I go into futures and where we're heading, I'd love Neil's take on this because I think we've talked about it a bit offline, but you're just contextualizing it from an MSP perspective would be great.
Yeah, it's truly amazing. I mean, what you've shown us there would be almost invisible to us as an MSP because, we can set the policies up, we can review them as and when we build them, but once they're in play, if they break, do we know without doing another review? And how often do we do those reviews? It's not going to be daily or hourly, and definitely not live, as you've shown. So just continually watching for policy drift or anything like that is fantastic. I think as well, the thing when you configure CA, they don't really make a bad configuration doesn't really make any noise. You switch it on or switch it off and you expect it to work, but nothing really flags up to say there's a problem. You get endpoint alerts, you get email alerts, you get all those kind of alerts, but you don't really get anything from CA saying that it's not doing, what you've configured it to do. So I think being able to report on it live and a continuous view of what's going off, as opposed to setting a scheduled, if you've got 10 or 20 or 100 or 1,000 clients, this is almost an impossible task to keep on top of. So I think, MSPs are good at deploying conditional access, not very good at validating them, over time. So yeah, just fantastic, really. Just from a customer assurance point of view, being able to change the conversation from, I think we've got everything okay, here's some graphs maybe and some data, to actually we know everything's okay from the moment we start speaking to you. And if you came back in an hour, a day, a week, or a month, we know everything's okay. And if something changes, we know what's changed instantly, and we can flick a switch to get it back locked down. So yeah, brilliant, really, really good.
Yeah, I think that's it's really important that understanding how do you know when it breaks, right? So the scenarios are that, hey, a user that was expecting to be able to access a resource isn't able to, and that's an impact to their day-to-day life. That can, if they're about to hop on a big webinar or whatever, and then they're not able to log into their emails because of a conditional access policy that you've pushed, then that's a real impact that you've caused to the user. You obviously want to get ahead of that impact, but from the other side of it, the other way, if it's a route that is not covered by a block, like a gap that you've exposed, that's exposed by a threat actor passing a certain set of circumstances and connecting into a tenant and accessing an app that they shouldn't be able to. That genuinely seems to be the way that people discover that they have holes in their conditional access policies, which is just, from our perspective, is just not viable as a solution. So yeah, that's why this tool is so valuable.
Great. Thanks, guys. If you guys have any questions, comments, just do pop them in there. We'll definitely cover them at the end. But I'm going to kind of just give us a quick snapshot of where we're heading at Overe. So all of that's kind of the plans. We do evolve very quickly, and so we're always led by your feedback. And so it's weekly. We speak to you guys and come up with ideas, and we get them into the product in this bi-weekly cycle. We constantly release it. So these are kind of the big rocks. Things will shift around, but I think the one thing which we always do look for is your feedback, and you guys give us kind of the pulse of the market for us. So we're always listening. So I hope that was useful for you guys. I don't know, Neil, any kind of closing comments from your side, and David?
Yeah, quite a few. It definitely covers a level that it hasn't been seen before. So MSPs are always looking at the alerts they see, the noise, the email alerts, endpoint alerts, all these kind of things. But the stuff that goes on behind the scenes that actually probably is the cause of most breaches, for example, it's the stuff that no one really looks at, the overprivileged accounts, compromised identities, etc. All those things that aren't actively monitored. This helps with that massively. And it really is going to give MSPs confidence, especially the smaller ones that don't have the technical ability, and the larger ones that have the tens, if not hundreds of clients. It really will streamline their teams to be able to deliver more via live reports, essentially, rather than having to rely on monthly, quarterly, even yearly reports, which can take days, if not weeks, per tenant in some instances. So yeah, it's just a real game changer and a breath of fresh air to the industry, I believe.
Yeah, from my perspective, I've just thank all the sort of customers I've worked with and the sort of feedback that I've been getting, and sort of a challenge. It's like, if you're really confident in your conditional access policies, then put your money where your mouth is and reach out to me, and we'll plug your tenant through. I'll be very impressed if there's no gaps. If you have all the security, you're just using the security defaults and you haven't added any conditional access policies, that doesn't count, okay? But if you're using your own conditional access policies and you think you're secure, I'd like to challenge you to that. So yeah, reach out and we'll go through your tenant together, and that'll help inform the product as well.
I would be terrified to plug this into my business that I no longer own, thankfully. Scary.
Great stuff. Yeah, no, it's happened live on calls. The beauty of the tool, it takes seconds to run. And one other thing to mention is the folks, which some of you guys already know, it's no additional app downloads. It's all going to be seamless. So it is literally just ping us a note and tell us the tenant, tell us the site you wish us to run it on, and we'll come back with a report, and we'll give you a quick snapshot of like, hey, here's a thumbs up, thumbs down. And if you want to jump on with David, then he can walk you through it a bit more in depth and guide you on where those gaps are and why they might be happening. But I'm going to check that we don't have any questions come in. If you guys as always, we're at hand to help you out, and I hope this was informative. We are looking to do a bit more of a regular cadence on product updates, probably a bit more condensed down. But yeah, we want to make sure you guys are in the loop, and do keep us honest and keep giving us feedback. And we really appreciate working with you all.